Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Coffee Talk. My name's Sean O'Brien, the president of QwickRate, and as always, pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm a director of analytics here at QwickRate and QwickAnalytics. I've spent my entire career working with community financial institutions and everything from strategic planning, valuation, M&A, and capital planning to model design and maintenance. And I've spent about a decade here working with Sean, bringing that experience to bear in the tools that you see before you today.
Thanks. And to add to our panel today, we are very proud and honored to have Jeff Fair join us. Jeff has, excuse me, as you can see, is a financial consultant who's worked with community banks for a number of years, including involving assisting them with M&A transactions. Jeff has been a good friend to QwickRate over the years, and we are thrilled to have him on here. Jeff, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and say a few words.
Thanks, Sean. Looking forward to today's conversation. As Sean said, I pretty much work in the community banking world, have done that for about 30 years. We work with 50 plus banks on a monthly basis, doing all sorts of budgeting, interest rate risk, liquidity management, capital management, strategic planning, and just about anything else that involves numbers. Love working in the field. Looking forward to hearing what these guys have to say today about CECL.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And for all of you, again, I think it's individuals like Jeff who we thought really could add a different perspective and certainly elevate the conversations we're having about CECL. As he indicated, he's on the front line with over 50 banks. And so we thought he would have a unique and fresh perspective to add to our conversation today. So Jeff, thanks again for joining us. Just a couple of reminders. We've been at this for quite a while this year, but again, we're going to use the Q&A box in the chat. Certainly a little bit different format than our traditional QwickRate webinars or QwickAnalytics webinars, but we found this to be very effective. So we certainly appreciate all of you joining us today. We did really, and we'll continue to do this through next year. The idea is that we don't want you to feel alone through this journey in the transition to CECL. So we felt like, continuing to provide not only updates on our solution itself, but give everyone an opportunity to bring forward questions, as we moved along, we thought would be helpful. We've appreciated everybody as attendance month to month. And again, we will continue this through all of next year as well. So I think today, again, as we get closer to, implementation, I think everyone's really starting to dive into the tool. Naturally that has presented new questions for us. We've tried to respond to them, not only in this, but then I think there's also been opportunities where we felt like we could make improvements to the tools or some of the support resources that we have. So one of those is regarding, just our user guide. And so Steve's going to talk a little bit about what we've got cooking there. Steve?
Sure. Would you like me to share my screen with for the actual guide itself?
Yeah.
For a couple minutes? Yeah. All right. Give me just a second to get that pulled up.
All right. I see it.
That pops up. Excellent. So something we just updated the other day on our site. As you guys are probably mostly aware, we're constantly looking at different ways we can enhance the tools and additional ways that we can kind of walk you through and guide you through using the tool on an ongoing basis. So we went ahead and made a kind of a comprehensive update to the user guide, which will include, which includes kind of a step-by-step in running the tool on an initial basis or on an ongoing basis, and we kind of take you through all those steps. The overview here is exactly what we've shown on previous coffee talks and webinars, just reminding you of in a general way how the tool works, coming preloaded with all your financial data from your call reports, and allowing you to spend your time focusing on the critical subjective inputs to calculating your ACL with a CECL methodology. starting with plugging in weighted average remaining maturity calculations, which we're going to talk a little bit more later. Some enhanced ways of calculating WARM and taking some different things into account, like amortization schedules, as well as prepayments, and walking through also from a tool or a model maintenance standpoint, the ability to make notes as you work your way along here. And that's something I think Jeff will probably speak to as well. It's a common refrain for us is as important, or a lot of times more important than what subjective assumptions you make about adjustments to your portfolio, certain assumptions with regards to WARMs and prepayments or qualitative factor adjustments. As important as what those value adjustments actually are is the notes and the justification and the narrative that goes along with those, right? And so we make sure that throughout the tool, whether it's on the summary page, whether it's detailed with the qualitative factor adjustments or the unfunded commitments, there's multiple different places where you can make notes on what you're thinking, what your thought process, how your math worked for any assumption, and then attach those notes to the risk pools as you go, so that when you save in a scenario, when you update something, when you export it and share it externally with an auditor or a regulator, that there is that sort of trail and thought process is in black and white there, so they can follow what you were thinking when you made the assumptions. This is all the same steps that we've talked about in the past, just sort of all refreshed and updated here on the newer user guide. First step obviously being inputting average remaining life values, whether that's something that you do yourself or whether that's something that you need some assistance from us. As much or as little help as you guys need, I know we say this a lot, when it comes to calculating your WARMs, we can provide. If your core has a great report that you can request that has WARM calculations with some prepayment assumptions in there, then you can use that, then great. If you aren't getting that support from your core and you need that support from us, whether it's us providing a template or whether it's you guys uploading your loan level data and us doing WARM calculations for you, we can help no matter what level of support you need. There is the flexibility of adding custom segments or risk pools into the tool. Obviously, we start with what we have available from the call reports, right? All that segmentation that we have, 20 plus years of relatively consistent historical data for not only your community bank, but also your entire peer group. But sometimes you have a segment that you feel like you need to split off from cull from the herd, so to speak, and do on a more custom basis. Our tool does allow for some flexibility there as well as some flexibility in look back periods. So again, this is step by step reminding you of kind of how to handle and how to update the tool on an ongoing basis with information about qualitative factor adjustments, suggested common factors utilized. And we're going to talk a little bit more about with Jeff today about how to defend those qualitative factor adjustments and how to come up with some of those adjustments. What kind of math you might use in creating your adjustments and then updating them and modifying them and defending them. We have a spot for individually assessed loans and held to maturity securities now, and we have some detailed guidance kind of walking you through how you might create a template for calculating the CECL reserve on unfunded commitments, since that's a piece of the puzzle. Not a completely new piece of the puzzle under CECL, but certainly a different take on it, we think, and a little bit more focus on it going forward than there has been in the past. And again, the unfunded commitment reserve is that thing that sits on, not within the loan loss reserve as a contra asset account, but actually sits in the other liabilities section of the balance sheet on the call report, and will continue to do so as we move into a CECL world. There's a quick summary for the steps for, if you're updating it on a monthly or quarterly basis, an old scenario, instead of kind of rebuilding the wheel, so to speak, you can pull up your old scenarios, update them with new data, and take these steps to update the tool. And then finally, just a quick overview of the Fed scale tool, which we also integrated into our CECLSolver as sort of a secondary methodology, or just a sanity check, or for anyone who is curious about how the scale methodology from the Fed works and what your reserve might look like, taking those steps and going about it that way. We made sure that we added that in there as well. So not a whole lot new per se on these slides here I'm showing you, but This new user guide is all nice and neatly packaged. And when you log into the tool, there's a big button up there for the updated user guide, and you can open this and print it out and share it as needed. Sean?
All right, thanks, Steve. And just a reminder, again, I think the idea here is, as Steve mentioned, right? Sometimes we get away from the tool just to need a little refresher. It may be helpful when interested third parties come in and ask, how the tool works. And then I think from this, a big part of next year, we'll be trying to work on to continue to work on the user experience and maybe address some things that, that you're all going through. So I'm Steve, I'm going to take back the screen here.
Yep, go ahead.
A couple of questions have come in. Let's take those. Good morning, Jeff. How would you recommend the Q factor peer experience be utilized? If my ALLL percentage is 1.13 and our peer group is at 130, do you suggest that I add 17 basis for this Q factor? So I'll take the first crack at this. So my, our position on the Q factors is that it was, if nothing else, exactly what you just pointed out, right? We wanted to give you some context to what your peers are doing. We think if it can be utilized as a source for an additional Q factor. We like the fact that it's an objective apples to apples comparison. The honest, the real point is you don't have to do anything with it. It is there as a supplemental piece of information that you can incorporate, or you can just leave there as an additional piece of supplemental information. Steve or Jeff, do you guys want to offer any?
Yeah. We get this question a lot, and it's a logical question after looking at your historical loss experience and then having your peers to compare it to. And I think the answer to the question, it depends upon how you feel about your historical loss experience, right? If you feel like there's no reason that your loss experience moving forward should be any different than your peers, then you might put more faith and more weight on the peer average versus as your guidance than your own historical loss experience. However, the peer data is most critical and probably most highly weighted in your in Q factors when you don't have much loss experience in a segment. So for example, if you've got a large mortgage portfolio and let's say it's 25% of your entire loan portfolio, but you haven't had any losses at all over the last 8 years. You have 0 net charge-offs over 8 years in your mortgage portfolio. If you've got a WARM of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we know we can't have no reserve for our mortgage portfolio going forward, even though we haven't had any losses, since the dawn of time. So we need to come up with some methodology, some reason or justification for having a CECL reserve for it, even if our historical loss experience doesn't show that. That's when we look outside of our 4 walls and we say, hey, we know we haven't had any losses, but we know that there's losses in the marketplace around us. We know that because we didn't just look at our experience. We looked at loss rates for every single other community bank, every mortgage loan in our market, no matter whether it was coming from us or any other bank in the area. And we see that these are the loss levels that our peers have been seeing. And so you're going to more heavily weight the peer experience under those circumstances. So it's really, as Sean said, completely subjective as to how much you want to take into account the peer experience versus yours. And that depends on what your losses look like. If you had, on the other side of the coin, if you had a recent very high loss in that segment, but you've been improving your underwriting standards. Maybe you've had some turnover in your loan originators, your loan staff, your lenders. You might say, hey, what happened to us 5 years ago is not really relevant anymore going forward because we've changed so much over the last 5 years. So I think for that reason, we're maybe going to focus more on the peer experience as being our guide. So I think there's lots of different reasons why you might take into account more or less the peer historical versus yours. But those are just my thoughts on it. Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to use this opportunity to go down a bit of a rabbit hole. Promise won't take long with it. But my big concern, probably my biggest concern about CECL is that in an attempt to get us to use more accurate data and support our reserve and look at life of loan, I think the regulators are going to be in some ways setting a trap for community banks. We're going to be documenting all of these thought processes that went into justifying whatever number we come up with. And we're going to write that down and we're going to put it in our minutes. And they're going to come and look at it during the exam. They're going to say, good job, guys. This makes a lot of sense. And then something will change. Perhaps we have one large loss and we have hung our hat on our historical experience is so much better than anything we can get from peer data. And we have in our documentation kind of just discarded peer. And now are we stuck using our historical experience when our history is not likely to be reflective of our futures? So I'm definitely in favor of documentation. If it's not written down, it didn't happen from a regulatory perspective. And the more detail we can provide about our thinking, the better. Just be careful that you don't move yourself into the tight corner of a very small box by documenting how you're doing it to the exclusion of all other methods and claiming that you know exactly how to get to where you want to be. For the first few years of CECL, stay flexible. Think about all of the different options that are available. Probably discuss the fact that you are considering peer, you are considering your historical, and wait until you know enough about the ins and outs of CECL over a variety of market conditions before you get too tightly locked into one structure.
I think that's great, great insight, Jeff. Thank you. I think, elevates another point that we've talked a lot about in this, right? This is going to be a process, right? And so we are, step one is getting transitioned, but I think as Jeff just said there, right, is let's not, kind of get back to one of those overarching themes of ours about being accurate versus being, overly precise, right? So be directionally correct. And then like Jeff said, as information comes in, kind of incorporate that along the way. So, all right. So we've got a lot of questions coming. So I'm going to keep going here. We're having trouble determining if HELOCs are quote unquote unconditionally cancelable for CECL purposes. Is there any guidance on that? Steve or Jeff, you guys want to take that one first?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have any guidance on it. It's a legal question. Certainly credit card loans are sort of the gold standard. Credit card loans are the definition of unconditionally cancelable, right? HELOCs have always been a bit of a gray area. And this is when I started researching a little bit more and talking to the accountants versus the regulators. And I found that the accountants and the regulators don't have the same definition of unconditionally cancelable. I would say the regulators, from a regulatory standpoint, HELOCs tend to be considered unconditionally cancelable. From a pure accounting standpoint, a lot of times they are not considered to be unconditionally cancelable. But it really does depend upon exactly the language that's used in the contracts that are written. So I would say you're going to have to look at those contracts and get some legal advice as to whether they constitute meeting the definition of unconditionally cancelable. Not a great answer, but.
Yeah, I think, again, Jeff, I don't mean if you were going to say it, jump in, but I think, again, I think this is something that, again, is probably unique to every institution. Everybody's agreements might be slightly different. Some may give themselves the provision. I certainly have talked to banks who within their agreements have given themselves the ability to make these unconditionally cancelable. But again, I think it's it's going to go back to the document you use.
What it means is, do you have how significant does a condition have to be to make it not unconditionally cancelable? Can you, the bank, at any given point in time, freeze that remaining credit without having to jump through a bunch of legal loopholes or meet a bunch of thresholds to do so? And so it's kind of a threshold question, and that's why we see different interpretations of it.
Next up, we have, if we have some SBA PPP loans still in the books that are 100% SBA guaranteed, how can we move them from 4A to be calculated at 0?
So that's when we're going to have a better way to do that in the future. But as of right now, you would net out the guaranteed balance from your current balance in the CECL tool. So on the summary page, there's a column that shows that the total current balance to be to apply the loss rate to, and you net out that balance. So if you have 100 million of C&I and 2 million are PPP, you go out to your 100 million, click it, overwrite it with 98 million, and then make a note saying that we netted out $2 million in guaranteed PPP loans. So that's how you would manage it. And then that entire 2 million, there's no loss, attributed or associated with it in the calculations moving forward.
And I would add, this is one of the areas that, as I mentioned, we are working on, some enhancements to kind of address this. This is a very common issue that we get not only with SBA PPP loans, but just other USDA guarantees, CD secured types of loans, anything where there's collateral pledged and the bank wants to remove those. As Steve indicated, we have a couple of ways to address that now, but we are working on a situation similar to like the individually assessed tab, where you'll be able to kind of more cleanly and more elegantly remove those. So we can certainly talk to you about the methods to do it now in greater detail if you want, but this will be something that, I think during the first quarter prior to that first filing, we should have a better and more elegant solution for you to address those pools of guaranteed loans you want to remove from the herd, if you will. Question, please discuss the current use of the unallocated allowance, which seems to be going away. Jeff, you want to take that one? You have any thoughts on the unallocated allowance? That's one that we get a lot on. And I think I'm interested for your perspective first, and then we'll jump in.
I don't know that I have a good answer there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, I think on the unallocated, I think Paul Allen, when he was on before and in the past, talked about that a lot of banks, have always kind of had an unallocated allowance. And I think in Paul's estimation, he indicated that he sees it coming, continuing to come forward, even through CECL. So I think in his mind, the big issue was threshold, how much of unallocated should be there. Again, this is another item that we've discussed, increasing the Q factors tab to allow for an unallocated allowance. And so again, I think if you've been using an unallocated allowance in the ALLL, I would continue to use it if you to or want to in CECL. I think the important piece is to, how much of a percentage, like Paul, I think, and he'll be on again next month. We can ask him again. My recollection is he thought 10 or 15% is about all the more you'd want to do on an unallocated allowance. But again, I that's coming from memory, so don't quote me. But again, I think if you've been currently using one, I think it's fine to continue to use it going.
Sean, I will weigh in on this point. The idea of CECL being some perfect model is silly.
Yeah,
we're still guesstimating the reserve. And going back to 2006, Sheila Bair, when she was in charge of FDIC, had a comment that stuck with me. And that was, if an examiner ever tells you you have too much in your reserve, have them call me. She said that 2 years before the 2008 meltdown. So I don't think the examiners should take too hard a view on this and say, if you can't prove it, you can't have it. So if you say, my gut just tells me that I need an extra $1 million in here, you're probably going to be okay with that, as long as you don't have a CPA that is so rigidly focused on GAAP that they can't understand the business of banking. I think we still have a lot of latitude to do what we want and document that. And it may not fit cleanly into whatever model you're using. You may just have to print out the model and down at the bottom of the page scroll plus $1 million for unexpected uncertainties and live with it.
That's fair. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Jeff. I mean, again, I think I firmly believe that, and I think again every institution's a little bit different, but I 100% agree with your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's I've seen presentations in both directions from different I've seen some accounting firms that have opined that they didn't see a place, looking at the CECL standard and reading it from FASB, they didn't see a place for unallocated reserve anymore. But it's not something that was specifically discussed in the standard or in the some of the roundtables with the FDIC. And so I don't have, to me, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Whether you choose to have an additional qualitative factor adjustment that you call unallocated and you add, to each of your segments or whether you say, listen, this unallocated represents our general concern about the direction of the economy, that could be an unallocated reserve on the end, or it could be in addition to your economic-based qualitative factor adjustment. Where you put that, it's since there's so much subjectivity in the Q factor area of CECL, whether it's subjectivity that you kind of call a spade and say this is unallocated because I don't have a bunch of math to back it up, but I just feel like we need to do that, versus making up some math and sticking it in the economic Q factor segment, or sorry, the economic Q factor area, is going to lead you to the same result. So hopefully they'll be honest enough about that appreciate the fact that you're being honest, that you don't have as much narrative to back up that additional reserve, but being more conservative from a reserve standpoint has not been an issue, as Jeff said, since about 2004.
Great. Thank you both. The next question is, now I see you using CECL surplus. How does this relate to unallocated? So a little bit differently. And again, this is something that is really going to be revised once we get into CECL, right? So the idea when we built the tool, as you see it today, as you were running your parallel runs, we wanted you to be able to compare it to what you were doing in the ALLL. And that's why we showed a potential surplus or a shortfall. Once the standard becomes the way of life, that comparison to your old ALLL will go away. So it's a little bit of a timing issue that we tried to put in there just to give you a comparison as you were doing these parallel runs. Steve, anything you want to add there?
No, it's it was surplus or shortfall refers specifically to, in parallel, CECL reserve versus your actual ALLL reserve. So methodology versus methodology, surplus or shortfall. Unallocated is a different concept. What you see on the screen here, I think, Sean is still sharing the kind of overview slide there, and you see that surplus down at the bottom. The math that we have at the bottom right there is going to change once we have adopted CECL. We won't be comparing your ACL with your with your old school ALLL calculation. There won't be an ALLL calculation anymore. There will only be your reserve calculation, which will be under CECL. And so what we'll have is current reserve, and then the CECL, your updated calculation, and then any difference would be, what you have to look at from a provision on the income statement standpoint. So it would be modifying your reserve over time and doing that through the income statement, like very much exactly like you do today, right? So it'll look a little different.
Yeah. So more to come. So I know there's some chats in here, so I'm going to get to those in a second. Just a quick, I'll paraphrase the question on a parallel run. The historical rate was showing a negative or parenthetical 1.19. And so anytime you see that anything in parentheses on your historical rate, that suggests a net recovery. So again, as Steve, I think, talked about in an earlier part of the discussion, you want to certainly make an adjustment to bring those net recoveries back to zero, potentially in your Q factor column. But that's what the parenthetical historical rate's really speaking to, is a net recovery. Steve, anything you want to add there?
Yeah. So there are things that you have to adjust for sure. Like if you simply had net recoveries over the last 4 years in an entire segment, your historical experience is going to be negative. Obviously, we're not going to project that forward because it's not something that any examiner or regulator is going to like to see you projecting on the remaining life of the loans. You're going to continue, recovering money forever. And so you make a Q factor adjustments to bring that negative back to a zero. That's another area where you're going to weigh heavily on the peer experience, right? Versus your own. Now, there can be situations where your entire peer group has net recoveries over a shortish look back period, but not nearly as frequently as an individual institution will have, obviously. So you never want to show negative expected future lifetime credit losses.
The next question is, again, this is a perfectly teed up question for ag lending banks separating call code 3 ag production from inclusion with C&I 4 would be helpful. Ag production has a significantly shorter average life. We are segregating it below total gross loans, but would prefer a separate line above. Steve?
I know Sean's brought this up to me for a long time now. So I'm not dragging my feet. The issue with the ag production loans is the way that they've been classified and reported on the call reports. A document that I've become more familiar with than I ever expected to be, because of these types of things. So the agricultural production loans, they're on the call reports, and we can even get some loss and recovery data from them. So, not only because we need loss and recovery and balance data. Unfortunately, there's a threshold limitation for when you have to report that information on the call report. So if your ag loans don't meet a certain threshold for size and whatnot, they haven't always had to be reported on there. So we don't have perfect segregated data between ag loans and the other call report buckets for certain institutions. You could report your ag loans one quarter, and then 5 years ago, if you didn't meet the threshold, all of a sudden you don't have to report it the next quarter. So we don't have perfect data. All that being said, and because I'm a stickler for I'm the data guy, we've decided that we're gonna find a way to get it on there, and just we'll have to make some footnotes and let you know, hey, listen, some of these long-term data trends for the industry and for the peer group are not going to be perfect due to these limitations, but we can still get a decent idea, better than nothing, of how they perform. So yeah, that's something we'll be adding in there. I know it's irrelevant for a lot of community banks, but for those community banks where it is relevant, it's extremely relevant. And we're sensitive to that. So don't let us off the hook with it. We do have the plans to be adding that with some caveats to help you out.
Yeah, and I think that just again illustrates the point. A lot of what we're going to be doing here in the next 4 or 5 months, and even throughout next year, is taking feedback from all of you for instances like that, right? And so, as Steve mentioned, ag production loans is something I've heard repeatedly from all of you. Being able to separate out those, potentially CD secured or other just credit guarantee types of loans. So we are working on, those types of things to better align your, portfolios with the way it looks from the call reports we have. So be patient with us. We have a long list. Steve and I went through them again on Monday. So there is a target list of updates like that we'll be working on.
And you'll see some in a few minutes here today. We're going to go through some of them in a minute.
Continue to share those, but we'll talk about those as well. All right, so let me get to the chat. I know there's more questions coming up. Lisa, thank you very much for the kind words on the review of the model. Anthony, your question on the ALLL to loans is hard-coded from the last quarter end, but I am updating the model monthly. Is this correct, or is there something I'm missing? That is currently, it's the one number is hard-coded, but your current ALLL you can update. So a little bit of, Steve, you want to take that?
Yeah, so the for purposes of the correct calculation in the model, which is the most important thing, obviously that the ALLL value is customizable, and you can update it as often as you have your as of date changes. The current ratio, the ALLL to loans ratio, is a most recent quarter one, because it's supposed to be apples to apples with the peer one. And the peer one obviously is not something that you can we're going to be updating monthly, because we don't have obviously the data to do so. So that's sort of the rate. You're right. The ratio is hard coded. It's designed to be an apples to apples comparison of you versus the peer. So you can say, hey, our reserve is higher. Our CECL reserve is showing 10% lower than our peers, but our current reserve level is also there. So it's that sort of a comparison. But I take your point, and we could certainly look at some way to represent your updated current ALLL value that you can override, and then do a calculation there that shows what that ratio would be. So we'll look into that from a formatting standpoint, because we're going to be considering that whole bottom summary corner there over the next month or two as well. So it's point well taken.
Great. Kennedy, echoing Jeff's comment, that's been our concern as well, with the continued push to accept the peer numbers for charge-off history, when historically our underwriting processes have improved and better than theirs. So again, peer data can be used in a number of different ways. There's no hard way you have to use that. So thank you for that comment. A comment on unfunded commitments. Can you discuss the relationship between the default values for estimated probability of funding, quote or parenthetically table data provided, and the value that is used in column D on unfunded commitment page? Why are they different percentages?
So I'm Yeah, this might be something where we want to have a call and chat with
Yeah.
you one-on-one to go through it. But in general, the estimated the default probability of funding data we get from the FDIC itself, right? The FDIC did a bunch of studies in the past. It's deep in the bowels of RCR Part 2 on the call report, where they did what they call CCF, or credit conversion factors, and that's kind of the FDIC's estimate of the likelihood that certain types of unfunded commitments would become funded within a period of time. You typically want a 1-year period, which is why we have to do some of our unfunded commitment stuff on a 1-year basis, and then multiply that by the WARMs in order to get a lifetime one, because we're using the FDIC's annualized credit conversion factor values. Now, they don't have one credit conversion factor. They have a few different ones for depending upon the loan type, and depending upon whether it's a shorter unfunded commitment or a longer unfunded commitment. So we looked at all the FDIC data. We tried to merge it into the segments that we have on the tool for unfunded commitments. There is a footnote on the bottom of unfunded commitments that tries to explain that as well as possible. And then that's what we use going forward. So if we want to, it'd probably be helpful to look at your numbers, and Linda, and go through that on a one-off basis. So please reach out to us, or we'll try to reach out to you afterwards and get that taken care of.
Thanks, Steve. The next is, do you offer a CECL policy template for banks? So we are working on one. So we should have it ready by hopefully the next month's coffee talk. So be patient, but we will probably hopefully discuss that. Jeff, and the policy template, do you have any suggestions, on things that you would look for, or you would currently, suggest to a bank about their policy?
Kind of going back to my previous comment, stay flexible. Don't put too many rigid policy statements in place until we know a lot more about CECL. And kind of on a parallel to that, be prepared for your first exam post CECL implementation to have a lot of comments about, we think you could improve this, we think you could improve that. The examiners are learning along with us. They don't have nearly as much experience running banks in most cases as you do, but they do see a lot more CECL models than you see. So some of their comments will probably be valuable. Others you'll just need to take with a gigantic dose of salt. And this kind of goes to a more general comment about interactions during examination. Don't make a commitment to fix something if it's not really broken. Just make a commitment to discuss it.
That's great. Great. All right. Next up, good morning, Paul. Can you discuss how to make custom peer groups?
Yeah, you want to give me the screen for 1 second, Sean? I can just do it's not something we've shown, like specifically explicitly shown, and it only takes a second. So I'll go ahead and do that. Let's see, screen share again. Got a lot of screens going on these days.
Yep, I see it.
All right. So up here in the CECL tool, you've got this blue bar up top, which is for the entire QwickAnalytics, not just the CECL tool. So if I clicked on custom peer groups, I'll hold down the control key so it opens up a separate tab, but you don't have to do that. If you click on custom peer groups, it'll open up this page here. This is a home page for all of your custom peer groups. I obviously spend way too much time on here, as you can see, and I need to do some housekeeping. But these peer groups you can use not only for the CECL tool, but for anywhere else on the QwickAnalytics platform, whether you're running a stress test, whether you're doing peer comparison, whether you're looking at detailed credit environment information. And so let's say I want to create a new peer group. There's 2 different types. Specific peer group is build-up method. These are the 10 exact banks I want in my peer group. I know them by name. I want to hand pick them individually. The other way is an automatic or a filtered peer group. That's where you say, hey, I want all the community banks in my state between $100 and $300 million in assets, right? You use filters to determine who is in and not in your peer group. So let's do it that way. I suggest automatic peer groups or filtered peer groups for CECL because you want a big peer group. It's really important. We're looking at the most detailed credit-related data that's available from call reports. We're looking at segment level charge-offs and recoveries going back 5, 10, 15 years. And if you have a 5-bank peer group, you're not going to get enough environmental, industry information to really see what long-term trends are in your neck of the woods. So I highly suggest making peer groups of at least 20, 25, 30 or more banks so that you don't get 5 whole segments with just 0 data, right? Because none of them have credit card loans. So let's do that. I want an automatic peer group, a bank using bank data. So, all right, I'm going to choose, let's go with Georgia, state of Georgia. And I'll stick with the whole state of Georgia for now. And I want assets between 100 and $500 million. If I did nothing else and just click search, there are 94 banks in the state of Georgia that have between 100 and $500 million in assets as of September 30th. That I can just do that. I could say, all right, I'll take these guys. That'll be my peer group. I'll give it a name, and then I can pull that up, save it, and I can immediately pull it up on the CECL tool. However, if I wanted to be more specific, so I can handpick the counties or the MSAs that I want and then redo the search. There's only 5 banks that are in one of those 5 counties. So you can be, more expensive or less expensive financially or geographically in coming up with peer groups. When you're building the filtered, the automatic peer group, you can't individually deselect banks. You can't say, all right, that's all great, but I don't want this one bank. Because a filtered peer group, you're saying, I'm not picking individual banks. I'm picking all the banks that meet these criteria. The good thing about that is what happens when some banks go into or out of meeting your criteria. You don't have to rebuild the peer group. It's self-monitoring, self-filtering, and self-cleaning, so to speak. So if one bank comes into meeting your criteria or gets too big for your criteria, our tool will automatically continually be recalculating the criteria to make sure that it's accurate and up to date. So it's kind of a set it and forget it wide net type peer group. If on the other hand, you want individual institutions, like you're going to pick 25 or 30 banks, you do a specific peer group and it's the same process, but then you can handpick the individual banks. I'll say, just show me all of Alabama. And then I'm going to pick the 7 banks that I want from Alabama. And then I'll save that as a peer group. So those are the 2 basic methods for creating a custom peer group.
Yeah, and there was just a question or chat that came in. Can you pick more than one state? And by holding down the control key, we've got an asterisk there, but you can pick from multiple states. So
yes. Yeah, so you can exactly, whether it's the automatic peer group where you say, I want all the community banks and in North and South Carolina that meet these financial, this asset range, no problem. Same thing with and if you have 2 states, but you only want, 5 counties in one state and 5 counties in the other, when you choose multiple states, all the counties in all of those states show up and you can say, I want, Yuma County in Arizona and Valdez in Alaska. This would be a horrible peer group, by the way.
That'd be a terrible peer group.
Not contiguous in the slightest.
No.
But good for, if you want to go back and forth between cold and warm weather. Anything else on that?
No, I think that's great. And, again, I kind of Steve, again, I think this is part of the beauty of QwickAnalytics. I always kind of come from the other way. I go specific peer groups. I like to create my filters. A lot of times I want to do ones in my backyard where you can be a little bit more flexible. I've helped banks build peer groups around kind of the look of their loan portfolio. So the bottom line, I think the beauty of our custom peer group creator is there's multiple ways to create a peer group. I think it really gets back to, create, multiple ones, right? As Steve said, create a large one, create one of your backyard competitors, create one that, based on banks, right? It's here to give you context and perspective. So, create as many as you'd like. They can be, as Steve is showing you, they'll warehouse and follow you around QwickAnalytics. So not only in CECLSolver, throughout QwickAnalytics. So, create different ones for different applications. But, I would encourage all of you to create custom peer groups. I'm a big fan of them. That said, you don't have to do anything with them, but I'm certainly a big fan of them.
Yeah, and you can, and again, as I'm showing you, when you click on the peer group box, you'll always have the option to do your UBPR peer group or your, what we call the QCBI, which just stands for QwickAnalytics Community Bank Index. It's just all the community banks in your state. And we have if you're curious as to how we define a community bank, we've got a spot on a link that we can send you, or it's on our main page there that that shows how we define a community bank. It's a pretty broad definition. We didn't want to exclude, too many people. But so QCBI Maine is just all the community banks in the state of Maine, because the bank I'm using today, for example, is a big community bank up in Maine. And then all your custom ones that you've ever built will show up right below the state and the national kind of canned peer groups.
Great. Okay, Steve, I'll take back the screen. Like, we got a whole lot more questions. So
Yeah. I created all these slides for today, Sean. I don't know if we're gonna get to them.
Everybody, I don't know if we're going to get to them at all. All right, so let's see. I've answered that one. Next up, we bought a bank 6/1 of 22. We've selected CECLSolver as our tool. Thank you. CECL planning went sideways. Let's see. Problem is 2 data sets from 2 different providers. Migrates me towards 2 FFIC loan data files. Asking help about that. So I think there's 2 things to say. Steve, I'll let you jump in on this, but I know just from and Tom, we can certainly talk offline, but I think one of the things in an acquiring situation is we always think your data should live, right? Your underwriting is going to live. And so your representative experience is probably what's going to win and carry forward going forward. But again, we can talk about this offline, but Steve or Jeff, anything you guys want to add here before?
Yeah, we can certainly help you look at the data from the acquired institution. You're not going to want to do, have this ongoing CECL reserve calculation for your portfolio, and then a separate CECL reserve calculation for the acquired portfolio, and then average them and then use that kind of going forward. It's too much. And the problem is they're not equal, right? The loans that you've acquired are now under your umbrella, but moving forward, they're all going to be managed by your staff when it comes to servicing the loans, when it comes to collecting on the loans, when it comes to all of that. And so it's not equal to kind of consider them equal. Now we can look at the historical data from the acquired institution. My suggestion, kind of thinking outside the box, well, maybe not outside the box, is you have a separate custom Q factor adjustment, right? You can add custom Q factor adjustments to our tool. You might have a Q factor adjustment that's called, acquired data historical differential, where you said, listen, we analyzed the acquired institution's loans on all the same buckets at ours, and saw that they had higher losses in C&I and lower losses in mortgages. So we're going to make an adjustment to our going forward portfolio CECL to bring it up a little bit in mortgages and down a little bit in C&I because of the effect of the acquired loans. And certainly take them into account if you're doing using loan level data to calculate WARMs. You can certainly take into account the acquired loans as well as the organic loans. So, and that's just 2 seconds worth, I know, but we can certainly talk about it more offline, but I think that's how I would proceed.
Yep, Jeff, anything to add there about acquisition?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Next up, are you considering adding a tool to help us calculate the expected amount to be collected on individually assessed loans? So, Lisa, thanks for the question. I think I know you and Larry from our IntelliCredit team have been talking. So I did talk to our team. So we're going to evaluate that. We certainly have a tool we use, in our loan reviews. So we're brainstorming on that with our IntelliCredit team to determine how we can best hopefully provide something on that in the future. Next question from David is, Franklin, good morning. I was late joining. If this is addressed, please ignore. Is there a button to update all relevant fields from your most recent scenario? Is this in the product roadmap? So Steve, do you want to take
Well, there's a couple right now. There's a couple buttons that get you there. It's kind of a piece by piece, right? You can, so right now you can take your old scenario, and if there's new financial data for the industry, let's say you created one based upon June numbers and now it's November and you've got, September numbers, not only for your bank, but for the entire industry, you can, on the historical tab, you can click on, set a common date range and then add that new quarter. So you can update the financial data historically that way. As far as all your current balances, yeah, that's another one that Sean's been on me for a while about. So we're going to be adding a drop-down box at the top of your current loan balances, where you can click on it and you can choose any historical financial period you want. So you don't have to come into an old one and override the June 30th ones with September 30th. They'll always be overrideable because you might want yesterday's GL, right? You might want to do a calculation as of November 17th, and that's never going to be public. But if you want to just push everything to the next full quarter end, there'll be a drop down box where you can say, hey, bring the current balances up to September 30th from June 30th. We've gotten a few requests for that, and that'll be there by the end of, by the end of next, sometime next month.
Hey, Steve, why don't you just quickly show the common date range? Because we did, the next question is the same thing, about moving individually assessed and Q factors forward as well. So that we'll have to, Lisa, thanks for that question. This whole idea of bringing data forward is something we are tackling. And, some of it's already there, as Steve's going to show you, but some of those.
It's in the guide, in the user guide as well. So in the user guide where we talk about the steps to update an old scenario, we take you through the steps of how to do that exactly step by step with some visual guidance. But I'll show you guys here just an idea. I'm pulling up this is something I did for one of our webinars a couple months ago, and June 30th wasn't out yet. And so this let's say this was your last quarter's calculation, right? All these balances, current balances are as of June 30th. Now I come back, a couple months later, I'm redoing it. I say, well, let me look at the historical. Oh, that's interesting. All right, so September 30th values are here. They're in the tool, but this scenario I saved as of June 30th. So we're not taking into account September 30th data because this has to be a historically accurate calculation as of when I saved it. So right now, you can see 930 values here on the historical table, but the model is using up to June 30th. So you can take this old scenario and say, all right, now let me update this, set the common date range. I want to push everything forward to 930 because it's all as of June 30th now. So now I'm going to say, push everything to, and I apply changes. Watch all the blue bars are going to shift to the right. The whole look back period gets jammed over to the right one. And now that blue bar, the look back periods are including and taking into account September 30th data. So I just pretty much took the universe of historical data for your bank and your peer group and shifted it all to include the most recent quarter. And then I would come into the summary results and I'd say, all right, now I need to update this to 930. This is the one where, because you can override them and do them as of any date, we don't automatically have these update to 930 because that would lose a lot of customer input. So I'll come in here, type in 930, and right now you have to manually type in the current balances for 930. There will be a drop down box here. That's what I was just talking about, that where you can click on it and then choose 930 to have it automatically update these for the most recent call report. So that's how you do it, and that's going to be our little enhancement to it. Once you've done this, do not resave this scenario. If I resave this right now, I will have lost that June 30th scenario that I created. And it was historically accurate and frozen in time as of June 30th. You want to be able to refer to that a year from now. So you can compare last year's June 30th with this year's June 30th. You will save this as a new scenario and give it a new date. So this is, sample November update. So now you create this, and now you have a new saved scenario, which is updated for November. So, push the historical data forward here, and then manually, as of right now, update these, and then double check all your Q factors and stuff like that, and then save it as new and give it a new name and a new date. Those are the basic steps for taking your old scenario, pushing it forward to the next quarter without losing anything, and also not losing your old historically integrity of your old reserve calculations.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So again, this is like these types of user experiences. Like I said, we are taking all of your feedback and trying to make sure we're making this as efficient for you as possible.
I see the follow-up. You're correct with the unfunded commitments. So when we make those updates, the updates to be able to pull these current balances, on an automated basis forward to the next quarter. You're right. Right now, the unfunded commitments, it pulled these values when you created the new scenario, right? But now that you're updating the same existing scenario for the next quarter, it's not re-pulling the current unfunded balances again from the call report. So we'll have the same drop. That's a great point. We'll have the same drop down box here on total unfunded commitment, because this is really the current, this is very similar here to this, right? These are current balances for the as of date. These are current unfunded commitment balances as of date.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll put that same box here.
Okay, thank you, Steve. The next question is from Ivy. Are you going to speak about the warm calculation along with consideration of the amortization and prepayment? So this is one of the topics we meant to address today. The questions have been so kind of free flowing, which we appreciate. But Steve, if you want to just jump to that, or actually it's my screen.
Okay, why don't you, put the presentation back on. We're going to do a little quick fire, go through some of these slides because I do want to show you guys some stuff that will address future questions. So
Are we going, which one are we going to go to her question?
Yeah, go to that one. So go, keep going. And we'll give you obviously a copy of this presentation too, so you can look at some of these things that we haven't really gotten to. So a question we had was the warm estimator tool that we put out there was a very straightforward, simplified, suggested way that you could get to a warm calculation for use in CECL. There are as many different ways of getting to that and as many different assumptions you can build into a warm calculation as there are subjective assumptions for CECL, surprisingly. So the initial one we put out there was a conservative, straightforward, easy way of calculating a warm if you wanted to use our template as opposed to going with your core or ALM or doing it internally. We've gotten a lot of requests for, hey, can you guys have another version of your Excel-based warm estimator tool that not only takes into account prepayment assumptions, but also we can do some amortization assumptions in there. And amortization assumptions can be very custom or specific, or they can just be kind of a universal, let's do some straight line amortization, but take that into account to get these warms down to a lower, more aggressive, less conservative level. So we listened, and go ahead, John, go to the next. So we're going to give you a second version of the warm estimator tool. So on the top left there, that's our current warm estimator tool, right? That Excel-based tool where you just plug in balances and maturity dates, and it does a basic weighted average remaining maturity calculation. Then you can plug in a prepayment estimate, and then it will affect that warm by the prepayment estimate and give you a prepayment adjusted one. Amortization is not taken into account. This is a slightly more complex version of the warm estimator tool where you can, on the top right, either cut and paste your own amortization assumptions in there at the loan level if you want to get really granular, or just assume straight line amortization across the board, or choose which loans you want to have amortized and which ones you don't want to have amortized. And it will do a kind of enhanced or kind of second level, so to speak, warm calculation that takes into account the amortization as well as the prepayments. And it will obviously result in a lower warm calculation. You can do it using the top right method, the loan level method, or you can do it as I've done on the bottom left there, where we take your warm calculation of 6.5 years, for example, and we use that as a proxy for the average amortization schedule for the portfolio on a straight line basis. And then we do it that way. So two different ways you can go about doing it, but it kind of gives you this will result in lower warm values. So if you're looking for ways to get that reserve down a little bit with some more, I don't want to call them aggressive, but less conservative assumptions, then this will be really helpful in helping you document, helping you justify do that. If you're over reserved and you want to stay over reserved, then you probably just stick with what you've always had in the initial one, because this will bring your warms down. So hopefully this will be helpful. This will be up on the site in the next couple of weeks as well. So this is a very soon to be added to the tool. Again, as an Excel file, as an Excel template. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Steve. So we're coming up on an hour. I guess a couple of things come to mind here. One is we're certainly going to see if Jeff can come back, since we didn't get to some of the topics we wanted to discuss with him today. So hopefully we can have him on in the next couple of months to revisit some of these. Some of the other comments that we have still in the chat that we haven't gotten to. Tom discussing about the ways to select those specialized groupings. We can talk to you offline about that. And then the question from Leah on breaking out 1 to 4 investment 1 to 4 from owner occupied. Again, that's something where you can customize your own pools. As long as you're breaking out the data, you will lose a little bit of the historical, but we can talk to you about some scenarios on how we can help with
Just
that
keeping
as
in mind,
well.
whenever you go more granular, yes, you are getting more detailed, but you're getting less and less data to go on. So it's very much a double-edged sword where you can go super granular and have 50 segments, but each of those 50 segments is going to have very little data. You're going to be basing your loss rates on a much smaller pool of historical experience with much spikier data, and you're going to have very little, if any, apples to apples external environmental peer-based data to compare to yours. So I would say, yes, you can additionally segment beyond the call report. Sometimes it's critical, or sometimes your auditor or examiner demands that you do so, and so you do what they ask you to do. But over segmenting can very much be a bad, you can overdo it very easily. And it can result in not more accuracy, but actually less accuracy and less justification for where you're going to end up.
Great. Jeff, any final comments? Again, I apologize. We didn't get to some of the topics we wanted to discuss with you, so I hope you'll come back and join us in a few months. But anything you want to share with the group?
I just keep documenting your assumptions, both for your mental health going forward and to show the examiners what you're working on. There is a lot of flexibility here. You can make your worm short or long, as Steve was pointing out with prepayment assumptions. Just keep in mind, every time you make a change, you need to have an explanation for why you did it, or else your examiner is going to have a field day with you.
That is a very, very true point. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. The questions were fabulous. Again, I think we're, like I said, we have a number of topics, so we will be sending out a link to the recording and to the slides, because some of the topics we did not get to today. Please join us again next month for our coffee talk on the December 16th. If we have any, people are still, making a decision, we will have a discussion on December 8th, just kind of talking about our tool in greater detail. And there was a question, can we have a Q factor document?
Yeah, that's exactly one of the things we wanted to talk about and have Jeff opine on as well. And I encourage everyone to look at this when we send you a PDF of the presentation. Take a look at it, because there are some slides on there that we didn't get to, which is new information and some new tools that we're going to be adding that you'll be able to see a preview of in the presentation, which you couldn't see live today. So take a look at that, and if you have follow-up questions, we'll talk with you about it. But we will be providing another Excel template, which helps on Q factor documentation and gives you kind of a matrix for your Q factor adjustments. And hopefully we can have Jeff back to talk about that in more detail as well.
Yep. Okay. So thank you all again for joining us. Thanks to Jeff for joining us again. Sorry we didn't get to all the topics we wanted to discuss. If you have anything in the interim, please reach out to us. We'll probably recirculate some of these topics again in the December coffee talk. Have a great weekend. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and just let us know how we can help. Steve.
Thanks, everybody.
Words? Yep.
That's it. Thanks, everybody.
All
I
right.
can go on, but I know we're out of time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye now.